Let us begin with a sentence so soft, so strangely heavy, that it might sit at the edge of your pillow like a patient ghost. Some texts are born holy, some become holy, and some vanish the moment humanity starts taking them too seriously. It is, admittedly, a problematic line, too dramatic for scholars, too casual for angels, too poetic for someone trying to sleep. Yet here you are, letting this nocturnal voice slip into your ears like warm incense curling through the corridors of an abandoned temple. Perhaps you've noticed it already, the delicious contradiction hanging in the air, like a censer swinging between devotion and satire. We are about to speak of faith, but not the polite kind that sits quietly in polite pews. No. Tonight we wander into the fog-covered realm where belief forgets its manners, where doubt keeps bumping into the furniture, and where the divine, if it is listening at all, pretends not to be home, because humanity is calling again with its endless questions. You and I both know the type of question I mean, the ones whispered at 3 a.m., when the ceiling fan rotates like the wheel of samsara, and every creak of the house becomes an omen. Questions like, what if the truth was never lost, just misplaced behind a stack of unread scriptures? Or perhaps, what if the universe does answer prayers, but only on the second Tuesday after a full moon, and only if the request is spelled correctly? These are the sorts of questions that lead people down long, winding, candlelit hallways of the soul, hallways where monks trip, prophets forget what they're prophesying, and scribes accidentally write the same sentence twice. And you, yes, you, leaning into this murmur of a story, might already feel the tug of irony threading itself through every syllable. It's impossible to avoid, like incense smoke in a chapel where the doors have been closed since the Crusades. You might think this is just another bedtime tale meant to lull you into a peaceful, pious slumber. But no. Tonight, we begin with a text that supposedly changed faith itself, before disappearing so abruptly that even the saints suspected divine paperwork had gone horribly wrong. But please, before you drift into the luxury of letting your mind dissolve into the shadows, do your small part to help this fragile narrative survive the night. Tap like, subscribe, and whisper a tiny digital prayer to the algorithm. Do it not for me. No, I am merely a wandering voice, but for the mysterious cosmic mathematics that decides whether stories like this continue to exist or end up buried beneath videos titled The Top 10 Miracles You Missed While Doing Laundry. If you feel the pull, subtle, quiet, eerily similar to the sensation of being watched by a medieval saint in a fresco, then you know what to do. Now, close your metaphorical door, or your literal one, whichever squeaks more ominously. Let the candle of your attention flicker. Imagine a dim archive, room, stacked with scrolls that never finished their sentences. A place where the dust looks judgmental and the shadows whisper gossip about forgotten prophets. This is where our tale begins, not in splendor nor in doom, but in that delicate space in between, where the sacred and the absurd hold hands like two monks sneaking out after curfew. They say there existed once, not twice, never twice, only once, a manuscript so peculiar, so luminously strange, that anyone who read even a fragment found their faith transformed. No two transformations were alike, of course. Faith rarely coordinates its miracles. Some felt illuminated, some felt undone. One unfortunate reader became convinced that salvation required balancing a bowl of lentils on his head during thunderstorms. But all agreed. The text shimmered with truth, or something that felt inconveniently similar. And then, naturally, as all things do when humans begin forming committees about them, it vanished. Ah, but notice your own reaction. That little spark of curiosity, glowing like the last ember in an incense burner. A holy text that changed faith and disappeared. Yes, of course it did. That is exactly the sort of thing mysteries are made of. If it had stayed where it was supposed to stay, neatly numbered and catalogued, nobody would remember it. Faith loves drama, after all. It thrives in tension, in contradictions, in the way priests whisper "believe," with the same breath in which scholars murmur, "but verify." You might be wondering why a vanished manuscript should matter to you, lying there in the half-dark, listening to a voice that sounds suspiciously like it's wearing a hooded robe. It matters because once upon a time, somewhere between the birth of doubt and the invention of holy disclaimers, it was said that whoever found the lost text again would finally understand the true nature of belief. Not the polite version taught in tidy sermons, but the raw, trembling, midnight version, the kind that leaks into your dreams and rearranges the furniture of your soul. And if you're beginning to suspect that this voice, my voice, knows more about that missing manuscript than it is currently admitting, well, your suspicion is wise. Wise in the sense that a candle flame is wise, flickering, unstable, and easily snuffed out by inconvenient truths. Still, let's linger here a moment longer in this opening hush. Listen closely. Do you hear that faint rustle? No, not your sheets. The rustle behind it, beneath it, woven through it like a monk hiding a forbidden joke in a psalm. That is the sound of the story waking up, stretching, remembering itself. For every sacred tale begins with a question, and this one begins with one that has irritated mystics for centuries. If divine truth ever arrived in written form, would humanity even recognize it? Or would we edit it, annotate it, mistranslate it, worship it, weaponize it, lose it, and then blame heaven for poor filing? Systems. There is something exquisitely human about misplacing the sacred, something tender about forgetting the thing that was supposed to save you, something ironic, yes, but also poetic, like a monk forgetting the words of the prayer he himself invented. Tonight, we wander through that irony together, you and I. Let it wrap around you like candle smoke that refuses to disperse. Allow the weight of this missing text to settle on your chest with a softness that is almost heavy. You don't need to believe it. You barely need to understand it. You simply need to drift with it, like a pilgrim walking in circles, because the map was drawn by someone who had never left the monastery. The story will unfold slowly, agonizingly so perhaps, because anything involving faith must move like molten gold dripping from a cracked chalice. Too fast, and it ceases to be sacred. Too slow, and it becomes a committee meeting. Our pace tonight is deliberate, because revelation always travels at the speed of a sleepless whisper. And somewhere, beyond the horizon of this first chapter, someone waits. A protagonist who believed far too strongly, doubted far too reluctantly, and fell into darkness with all the dramatic flair of a saint auditioning for the role of tragic hero, Martha 3. But we do not meet him yet. No, tonight you and I simply prepare the ground, sweeping the dust from the floor of this imaginary temple, arranging the shadows just so, making room for a story that is both delicate and absurd. Let this be the beginning. A vanished text, a shaken faith, a whisper in the dark corridors of your thoughts, a question too big for its own robes, and you, lying there, suspended between waking and sleep, between belief and the gentle comedy of disbelief. If the candlelight within this story has flickered to life for you, if the dust has begun to swirl in familiar patterns, if the irony has settled comfortably like a mischievous angel on your shoulder, then stay. The night is long. The manuscript is missing, and the truth, whatever that word means, waits patiently, tapping its foot. If you truly wish to continue, then let us step deeper into the dusk-drenched corridors of this tale, slowly, gently, as though the very stones beneath your feet are ancient ribs of the earth exhaling dust from centuries of holding secrets no one asked them to hold. It is time, finally, reluctantly, theatrically, to meet the unfortunate soul at the center of this story. A man whose faith was once sturdy enough to withstand drought, doubt, famine, prophecy, bureaucracy, and poorly translated scripture, until, of course, the text appeared, and then disappeared, and then, inconveniently, took his certainty with it. His name, at least the name he used while living among people who preferred their prophets quiet and their monks predictable, was Brother Aurelm. Not Aurelian, not Aurelius, not Aureliano, no, Aurelm, a name that sounded like someone had sneezed halfway through naming him, but which he bore with the resigned dignity of a man accustomed to cosmic disappointments. In the monastery where he resided, a crumbling stone labyrinth perched on a wind-thrashed mountain, names mattered far less than silence, humility, and the ability to pretend you understood metaphors even when you didn't. Imagine the place. An ancient cloister long past its architectural prime, clinging to a cliffside as though too embarrassed to fall. Stone arches bowed under the weight of centuries. Wooden doors groaned with the musicality of creatures in pain. Incense drifted through the hallways like ghosts who never learned where the exit was. And everywhere, dust. Dust soft as whispering regret. Dust old enough to have witnessed revelations. Dust that clung to robes, sandals, scrolls, and any monk foolish enough to inhale near the archives. It was a place where faith wasn't simply practiced. It fermented. Brother Aurelm had lived there since he was 14. Some people joined monasteries to escape the world. Others joined to serve God. Aurelm joined because the village rumor had promised quiet work. And indeed, it was quiet. Quiet in the way that cemeteries are quiet, or libraries after hours, or the inside of a saint's skull long after enlightenment has fried whatever thoughts used to be there. The daily routine for Aurelm was a beautiful contradiction. He rose each morning before dawn, not because he was particularly holy, but because the monastery bells were rung by Brother Elisiar, who believed the correct volume for morning prayer was Earthquake. Aurelm would shuffle out of his straw-stuffed mattress, rubbing sleep from his eyes and silently cursing every doctrine that recommended early rising as a pathway to spiritual clarity. Spiritual clarity, he often suspected, required sleep, deep sleep, preferably until noon. He dressed in robes that smelled faintly of mildew and humility. He washed his face in water so cold it felt like being slapped by a disappointed deity. He walked to the chapel, where the candles flickered like desperate students signaling distress during exams. And there, like everyone else, he prayed. At least, he moved his lips in a manner that strongly resembled praying. Whether anything meaningful happened behind those lips was a matter between Aurelm and whichever celestial entity might be bored enough to monitor his thoughts. More often than not, he prayed the way most people breathe, unconsciously, out of habit, and with no particular enthusiasm. His spiritual life before the crisis could have been described as steady but absent. much like a monk-shaped piece of furniture. The irony of his devotion was not lost on him. Aurelm believed in faith the way one believes in umbrellas, useful, necessary, but generally disappointing during storms. His fellow monks, meanwhile, lived in a perpetual state of solemnity, which Aurelm privately suspected was just boredom-wearing, religious clothing. They glided through the monastery like ghosts assigned chores. Their sandals whispered on the stone floors, their hoods casting shadows deep enough to hide entire philosophical dilemmas. They copied manuscripts by hand, slowly, painfully, with the resigned grace of people who had accepted that eternal salvation probably required atrocious handwriting. The monastery itself had a personality, if you paid close attention. It creaked when it wanted to be dramatic. It groaned when the wind threatened to shove it off the cliff. And every once in a while, usually during evening prayers, it produced a long, low moaning sound that sent chills up the spines of novices, but which the elder monks assured everyone was perfectly normal, structural behavior. Aurelm knew better. He believed the building simply enjoyed frightening people. And honestly, who could blame it? When you've been standing for 800 years, entertainment options are limited. Aurelm's assigned duties were humble, but indispensable. He swept the scriptorium each morning, a task that produced more dust than it removed. He tended the small garden terraced along the cliffside, where medicinal herbs fought valiantly against the wind and the wind usually won. He assisted with the chanting, though assisted was generous. Aurelm had the vocal range of a dying reed, and the choir master often glared at him, as though sound itself had been insulted. But above all, Aurelm was responsible for the archives, a sprawling collection of scrolls, manuscripts, fragmented prophecies, and questionable theological essays written by monks who had been awake far too long. He dusted the shelves, catalogued the scrolls, copied fading letters, and occasionally tried to decipher ancient marginalia, most of which turned out to be monks complaining about back pain. In truth, Aurelm felt comfortable there among the texts. Books didn't judge. Scrolls didn't sigh. Sacred manuscripts never asked him why he prayed with the enthusiasm of someone filing taxes. The archives were quiet, and he liked quiet. Quiet was predictable. Quiet didn't require answers. He never questioned his role. Why would he? Faith, to him, was something like furniture. It remained in the same place unless someone foolishly tried to rearrange it. He believed in God because doubting seemed exhausting. He followed the rituals because everyone else did. And social pressure is the most underrated theological force in history. He experienced small doubts, of course, everyone does. But Aurelm treated his doubts the way monks treat mice in the pantry. Pretend you didn't see them, and maybe they won't multiply. If someone had asked him then, before everything cracked, before the text turned his life inside out, what faith felt like, he might have said, "It feels like walking through fog, peaceful, a little confusing. But eventually you arrive somewhere, probably." And if someone had asked why he believed, he might have shrugged and said, "Well, it's simpler than not believing." He didn't realize that simplifications, especially spiritual ones, tend to come with expiration dates. One cold and particularly judgmental morning. Most mornings were judgmental, but this one felt personal. Aurelm found himself sweeping the scriptorium while the other monks recited psalms in the chapel. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters with the impatience of a prophet demanding attention. The candles flickered with the energy of tiny, nervous angels. Dust swirled as though answering prayers of its own. Aurelm paused mid-sweep, listening to the distant chants echoing through the stone. A small smile tugged at him, not because he felt holy, but because the sound of chanting meant he was temporarily alone, and therefore safe from the choir master's glare. He breathed in the scent of parchment, ink, and quiet despair. The air was thick with it. Every monastery has a scent, after all. Some smell like holiness, some smell like incense. Aurelm's monastery smelled like forgotten hopes, and the stubborn optimism of monks determined to outlive their own doubts. He moved toward the shelves, running a finger along the spines of old manuscripts. He touched them the way one might touch the shoulders of old friends, tentatively, affectionately, without expecting them to talk back. In that room, Aurelm felt almost devout. Not in the loud, passionate way preachers describe, but in the subtle way that comes from belonging to a place whether you like it or not. The entire monastery felt like a large, ancient animal, breathing slowly around him. Stone ribs, candle lungs, drafty sighs. Aurelm existed inside it the way a thought exists inside the mind, quietly, unimportantly, yet undeniably present. And if a narrator had appeared from the shadows and told him, in that moment, that his life was about to unravel, that faith was about to peel itself open like a fruit too ripe to hold its own secrets, Aurelm would have laughed. A small laugh, of course, because monks weren't supposed to enjoy things loudly, but a laugh nonetheless. Nothing extraordinary ever happened in that monastery. Only the daily rhythm of prayer, dust, candlelight, silence, doubt, and the occasional theological argument about whether angels had ankles. Aurelm, as far as he knew, was nobody important. He was a man with an unremarkable life, serving an unremarkable purpose, in a place that had mistaken stillness for sanctity. He wasn't ready for a miracle, or a revelation, or a disaster. But faith, especially faith that has been ignored for too long, has a sense of humor, a painful, poetic, inconvenient sense of humor. And deep within the archives, hidden in a corner, Aurelm had never thought to clean thoroughly. Something waited. A curled fragment of parchment. A whisper trapped in ink. A truth too heavy for a man who only prayed out of habit. The monastery breathed. Aurelm swept, and the text, the one that would undo him, stirred as though waking from a long, disappointed sleep. He felt none of this, of course. Why would he? No one ever senses the earthquake before the floor gives way, especially not those who have spent their lives sweeping it. Before the text revealed itself, before ink rose like a serpent from sleep, before the fragile architecture of Aurelm's beliefs trembled like a candle exposed to a careless sigh, his faith could best be described as beautifully inconsistent. A patchwork quilt of devotion stitched together with habit, with tradition, with gentle fear, and with the quiet hope that the universe might notice his efforts and give him partial credit. Aurelm believed in the divine, the same way most people believe in the nutritional value listed on a cereal box. Earnestly, vaguely, and with a suspicion that something was probably exaggerated, but not exaggerated enough to cause inconvenience. To understand Aurelm's spiritual life, picture a bowl of lukewarm porridge, reliable, comforting, undramatic, something you consume not because you crave it, but because tradition swears it is good for you. His prayers rose each day not like ascending incense, but like tired smoke from damp wood, persistent, wavering, a little embarrassed to be seen. He never doubted God's existence exactly. He simply doubted God's availability. In his mind, the Almighty was like an overworked clerk processing miracles from behind a mountain of divine paperwork, occasionally stamping a request at random: approved, rejected, pending, lost in celestial transit, returned to sender due to insufficient piety. Orelm's own petitions tended to fall into the cosmic equivalent of the miscellaneous file. He prayed regularly, yes, but his prayers were about as passionate as someone ordering bread in a marketplace. "If it is your will," he would murmur, "grant us a harvest that doesn't entirely fail this time." Or, "Heil Brother Mattin's cough, or at least make it quieter." Or, "Guide me, O Lord, unless you are occupied with more important spiritual emergencies, in which case I will manage as best I can." His piety was respectable, moderately sincere, enough to avoid spiritual scandal, but not enough to generate miracles worth gossiping about. And yet, despite the lukewarm texture of his devotion, his faith had a strange beauty to it. It was a faith softened by imperfections, shaped by the tiny cracks in the monastery walls where the wind whistled reminders that the world was vast, unknowable, uncaring, and yet somehow still beloved. His belief was simple, not the roaring, ecstatic belief of mystics who converse with celestial beings, nor the rigid, armor-plated belief of theologians who arm-wrestle each other with doctrine. No, Orelm's faith resembled a quiet plant that grows not because anyone waters it, but because it stubbornly refuses to die. He believed in miracles the way someone believes in supermarket discounts, possible, even likely, but rarely applying to anything he personally needed. Brother Yoram once claimed that during a thunderstorm, an angel had appeared to him holding a flaming scroll. Orelm merely nodded politely, congratulated him, and returned to his vegetables. Another monk swore that the Virgin had kissed his forehead in a dream. Orelm offered him extra bread at supper, not because he believed him, but because anyone who dreams so intensely probably needs a snack. He liked faith best at night, when the monastery was wrapped in darkness, and even the shadows seemed weary. In those hours, he would sit alone in the chapel with a single candle, letting its glow tremble across the altar. The silence tasted like old stone and waiting. He would whisper prayers not because he expected a reply, but because whispering into the dark soothed something soft inside him. A longing, perhaps, or a loneliness so ancient it had forgotten its own name. Orelm trusted in God the way one trusts in the horizon, present, unreachable, comforting from a distance. He believed the divine existed, certainly, but he doubted the divine checked its messages frequently. Sometimes, during morning chores, he would imagine heaven as a vast office with angels sorting prayer requests into tall stacks, urgent pleas, casual petitions, vague existential inquiries, and perhaps somewhere near the back, the humble pile labeled Orelm, low priority but harmless. He never envied the saints. Saints had responsibilities, reputations, miracles to maintain. Orelm preferred anonymity. He believed holiness should be subtle, like a good stew, warm, nourishing, and unlikely to draw attention unless someone was hungry. His certainty was gentle. Not a blazing torch held against the darkness, but a small lantern cupped inside his palms, shielding it from winds of doubt that blew across the monastery whenever a prophecy failed, or a monk confessed to losing faith in the middle of a hymn. But Orelm never panicked. Spiritual crises were for people who expected answers. Orelm expected nothing more than silence, and silence rarely disappointed. That is not to say he lacked imagination. On the contrary, his mind was a quiet museum of hypothetical theologies. Sometimes he imagined God as a weary scholar endlessly editing creation because humans kept misinterpreting the footnotes. Other days, he pictured the divine as a gentle old woman sweeping the heavens and sighing each time humanity invented another sin requiring explanation. On very tired afternoons, he suspected the universe was run by a committee, one that met infrequently and never reached consensus. But deep beneath these whimsical constructions lay a tender thread of belief woven into his earliest memories. His mother lighting a candle, his father kneeling in the small chapel of their village, whispering prayers shaped by generations, the smell of incense blending with wood smoke, the warm flicker of devotion soft against his childhood cheeks. These impressions rooted themselves quietly in Aurum, blossoming into a faith that was imperfect but loyal, loyal despite confusion, doubt, and the absence of divine memos offering clarification. His fellow monks mistook his calmness for spiritual depth. Brother Elisier once remarked, "Aurelm prays like a man who has seen the face of God." Aurelm had not, of course. At best, he had seen the face of Brother Rendall forgetting to shave for a week, which was arguably more terrifying. But Aurelm let them believe whatever they wished. Correcting people required energy, and piety was the one currency he never had much motivation to earn. He performed rituals with the resigned grace of someone performing a dance they learned as a child and never quite mastered, lighting candles, chanting hymns, copying scrolls, dusting altars. Each task done precisely, consistently, almost reverently, yet always with an underlying irony, as though he were aware that the universe was watching from above with raised eyebrows. Aurelm's spirituality had rhythm, but not direction, shape, but not fire, stillness, but not depth. And so, when younger monks asked him for guidance, he offered the only wisdom he genuinely possessed. "Faith," he would say, "is like walking through fog. You don't see the path clearly, but you trust that it continues." They nodded, thinking him enlightened. Aurelm nodded back, thinking them overconfident. He carried his doubts quietly, like stones in the pockets of his robe, not heavy enough to hinder him, but noticeable when he walked. He doubted whether prayer influenced anything cosmic. He doubted whether his small acts of devotion meant anything beyond their own repetition. He doubted his own sincerity sometimes. But he never doubted that doubt was normal. After all, even the holiest figures in Scripture occasionally questioned the heavens, but few people paid attention to those footnotes. If Aurelm had one true spiritual gift, it was the ability to hold contradictions without collapsing under them. He believed wholeheartedly and disbelieved gently, and the two states coexisted like siblings, forced to share a monastery cell. He had learned to live with the mystery, not celebrate it, not solve it, but accommodate it with the weary hospitality of a monk offering tea to an unwelcome visitor. But all this delicate equilibrium, this precarious harmony of belief and irony, this quiet tolerance of cosmic ambiguity, rested upon one crucial assumption: that nothing unexpected would happen, that faith would continue as it always had, that the universe would keep its distance, that revelation, prophecy, miracles, and divine messages would remain politely out of reach, leaving him to enjoy his fog without lightning bolts or burning bushes disturbing the view. Aurelm assumed his spiritual life would remain stable, predictable, unremarkable. But assumptions are dangerous things. In monasteries built too close to the edge of divine boredom. For somewhere, buried under centuries of dust he had swept but never truly disturbed, lay a fragment of parchment waiting for him, waiting with the patience of something that knows it will change whoever touches it, something that had been lost, found, forgotten, feared, revered, hidden, mislabeled, and possibly cursed, though monks avoided using that particular word. Aurelm believed his faith was steady, strong, familiar. He had no idea it was as fragile as a candle flame near an open window, and the window was about to open. The text was waking, the ink was stirring, the truth, whatever shape it intended to take, was preparing to whisper. And Aurelm, poor, unsuspecting Aurelm, still believed that fog was safe. And so it happened, quietly, as all spiritually catastrophic things do. Not with thunder, not with flames, not with angelic heralds trumpeting, "Prepare thyself, brother Aurelm, for the unraveling of thy peace." No. The universe prefers subtlety when upending a man's faith. It finds it more amusing that way. It was late afternoon, that liminal hour when the monastery softened into shades of amber and long shadows, when monks moved like slow-moving punctuation marks across the stone floors. That time of day when the candles hadn't yet been lit, but darkness was already browsing through the room like a customer deciding where to settle for the evening. Aurelm was alone in the archives, sweeping dust with the resigned patience of someone who knows dust is both eternal and personally vindictive. He swept in slow arcs, stirring little clouds that glittered in the fading light like guilty angels caught sneaking home past curfew. The shelves hummed quietly in their own wooden way. The air smelled of parchment, old ink, and the faint disappointment of centuries. He should have heard something, a whisper, a creak, a cosmic chuckle, but he didn't. Doubt never announces itself. It arrives like a draft through an unseen crack. It brushes the back of your neck with one cold question. It slips into the folds of your mind where certainty once slept. Aurelm's moment of unmaking began with something spectacularly mundane. A scroll falling off a shelf. That was it. Just a scroll falling. Gravity doing what gravity does best. Except scrolls did not normally fall in this archive. The shelves were stable. The scrolls tightly rolled. The room had no windows for mischievous breezes, and Aurelm had not touched that particular shelf in hours. The scroll dropped with a soft thud, landing precisely at Aurelm's feet with the rude confidence of a cat demanding attention. He stared at it. It stared back, in the way inanimate objects do when they are about to ruin your year. Aurelm bent to pick it up, muttering, "You are not supposed to do that." His voice echoed faintly between the rows of ancient texts. Monks were not encouraged to speak to manuscripts, but they weren't forbidden either, and Aurelm found it therapeutic. The scroll was unmarked, strange in itself, since every scroll was meticulously labeled by generations of monks who believed disorganization led directly to heresy. No title, no tag, no ribbon indicating sanctity level or theological risk. Nothing. Just blank parchment wrapped around something that felt slightly warm. Warm? No, surely not. Aurelm touched it again. Yes, warm, like a stone left in the sun or a confession left too long unspoken. He frowned, because objects weren't supposed to have opinions, and warmth felt suspiciously like an opinion. He lifted it closer to his face. That was when he heard it. Not a voice. Not even a whisper. More like the soft exhalation of someone remembering a secret they were never meant to tell. A faint sigh that brushed Aurelm's ear and evaporated before he could decide whether it had existed. He froze. "Hello?" he asked, immediately regretting it. Speaking to invisible forces rarely ends well. The archive offered no reply. The scroll remained stubbornly innocent in his hands. Reasonable men, and Orelm considered himself extremely reasonable, would have simply placed the scroll back on the shelf and blamed fatigue, gravity, humidity, or Brother Elisiar's incompetent shelving from last year's recataloguing project. But Orelm was not entirely reasonable at this hour of the day, or perhaps the hour was not reasonable with him. He unrolled the scroll. Just a little, just enough to see if it was blank. It wasn't blank. Of course it wasn't blank. Orelm stared at the inked symbols on the page, though calling them symbols felt inadequate. They were shapes, lines, curves, yes, but they moved. Very slightly, very subtly, like thoughts trying to hold still, like letters embarrassed to be caught existing. He blinked. They stopped moving. He blinked again. They shifted, just a hair, like breath-stirring dust motes. Absolutely not, Orelm whispered, stepping back. No. He closed the scroll carefully, firmly, with the same caution one uses when shutting a window during a suspiciously dramatic storm. He took another step back. This was nothing, he told himself. Fatigue, imagination, a trick of the light. Or perhaps poor eyesight. He had spent years copying manuscripts by candlelight, and the universe was not known for providing ergonomic working conditions for monks. But the doubt was there now. A small, tiny, barely formed question that unfurled like a fragile leaf. What if the scroll is real? And then, the more dangerous one. What if everything else is not? He squeezed his eyes shut. No, ridiculous, impossible. Faith was stable. Faith was steady. Faith was an old stone building with roots sunk deep into tradition. Faith did not waver because of one dusty scroll behaving like a mischievous squirrel. He opened his eyes. The scroll was still warm. He swallowed. Perhaps it's only the sun, he murmured. Except it wasn't. The sun had not reached that shelf in decades. Orelm walked away. He tried to resume sweeping, but his broom kept drifting toward the scroll like a magnetized question mark. The room suddenly felt uncomfortably alive. The shelves seemed taller. The shadows seemed closer. The air seemed thinner, as though the archive had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. Orelm's heart thudded, not in fear exactly, but in that uncomfortable rhythm one feels when standing at the edge of a philosophical cliff. He forced himself to continue sweeping. He lasted 7 seconds. Because then, exactly then, something absurd happened. Something tiny, something unworthy of spiritual crisis. The broom bristles brushed a small piece of parchment on the floor, a scrap. A corner torn from some ancient manuscript yellowed by time, unremarkable, except for 6 ink strokes, forming a sentence so ordinary it should have meant nothing. Do you see it? Orelm's lungs forgot their purpose. He looked around. No one there. The silence pressed against his ears like cotton soaked in suspense. He lifted the scrap. The ink shimmered. Just barely. Just enough. He dropped it. It fluttered down like a falling leaf. No, he whispered. No, no, no. Absolutely not. He backed away until his spine touched a bookshelf that groaned as though disapproving his retreat. He steadied himself with shaking hands. He inhaled deeply, regretting it, because the air tasted different now, charged, metallic, warmed by an unseen presence like breath exhaled by an idea. The monastery was not known for paranormal events. The most supernatural occurrence last year had been Brother Ranulph sneezing during Vespers and claiming it was the Holy Spirit passing through him. But this was something other, and Orelm, in all his cavalier humility, was not prepared. He retrieved the broom. He held it like a weapon. He knew it wasn't a weapon, of course, but it made him feel 3% less absurd. He stared at the scroll, The scroll remained perfectly still, perfectly innocent, perfectly nameable, as not my problem. Except it was his problem. The kind of problem that plants itself in the garden of your thoughts and starts growing without permission. He tried to calm himself with the theological mantra monks had whispered for centuries. Perhaps it is nothing. A phrase useful for creaking buildings, silent heavens, and uncomfortable revelations. But the doubt had already sprouted. He felt it tightening around his ribs. What if the divine was not silent, but subtle? What if the world had been speaking all along in ways too delicate for habitual faith to notice? What if certainty was not the anchor he believed it to be, but the chain that kept him from seeing? Orelm hated these thoughts. He preferred faith to be simple, predictable, a quiet routine he could fold like linens. But the scroll gleamed faintly in the dimness, pulsing once like a heartbeat buried in parchment. He shook his head violently, as if trying to rattle loose whatever nonsense his brain had absorbed. No, he told himself firmly. I am tired, that is all, very tired. I will put the scroll away and drink water, cold water, lots of it, possibly an entire bucket. But his hands would not obey, his feet rooted to the floor. His breath stilled. Something inside him, something ancient, something he had buried beneath years of comfortable belief, leaned forward. Curiosity, spiritual longing, the dangerous part of faith that seeks truth, even when truth prefers to be left alone. "What do you want?" he whispered. Silence, but not empty silence, waiting silence. He hated that. Orelm did what any sensible monk would do when confronted with the first whisper of cosmic interference. He fled. He left the broom. He left the scrap. He left the scroll glowing faintly on the floor like an unblinking eye. He stepped into the hallway, heart pounding, robe swishing, sandals slapping stone with undignified speed. And yet, even as he escaped, he felt it inside him. The seed of doubt. Tiny, quiet, warm, alive. It settled beneath his ribs like a question with too much patience. He knew with absolutely unwelcome certainty that he would return to that scroll, because the seed had been planted. And seeds, especially spiritual ones, never stay small. Denial, when practiced with true devotion, can be a form of spiritual art. Some monks achieve enlightenment. Orelm achieved avoidance, and he did so with such theatrical enthusiasm that even the saints, those patient accountants of human folly, would have paused, quill midair, to admire his technique. The moment he fled the archives, breath panting like a nervous confession, Orelm decided one thing with absolute clarity. None of that happened. The scroll had not moved. The ink had not shimmered. Warmth was an illusion. Voices were drafts. Doubt was a trick of the light, or rather a trick of the dimness. No one, Orelm reasoned with mounting confidence, should trust thoughts formed at dusk. Dusk was when monks became dramatic, when scriptures seemed deeper than they were, when shadows invented stories just to pass the time. So, Orelm did what any self-respecting monk would do after encountering something potentially divine, dangerous, revelatory, or all three at once. He ignored it completely. He marched to the courtyard with exaggerated purpose, shoulders stiff, chin lifted, as if sheer posture could shield him from metaphysical nonsense. The air outside was cold enough to slap his thoughts back into linearity. Good. He needed linearity. He needed order. A man did not simply find a warm, moving text and allow his worldview to wobble. No, he reaffirmed reality. He affirmed it loudly inside his mind like a prayer shouted at a lazy deity. He dipped his hands into the fountain, water so icy it felt like cleansing administered by an annoyed angel, and splashed his face repeatedly. "I am fine," he announced to the fountain. The fountain, to its credit, remained silent. "Good," Orelm said. "You understand." He stood there for a moment, dripping as though water could wash away epistemological implications. He inhaled. He exhaled. He arranged his robes in a manner he hoped communicated emotionally stable. Then he marched toward the chapel for evening prayers. If anyone noticed he arrived early, they didn't comment. Monks rarely commented on anything unless it involved heresy, improperly stacked firewood, or whether Brother Malvar was secretly hoarding honey. Orelm slipped into a pew and knelt, quickly, decisively, like a man trying to outrun his own memory. He bowed his head. "Yes," he whispered to himself, "this is better. This is normal. Normal things are not terrifying." The chapel was dim, lit only by a cluster of candles trembling like nervous petitioners. Incense drifted lazily upward, weaving into shapes that were almost meaningful. Orelm watched the smoke rise and told himself it was merely smoke, not a portent, not a warning, not a sign. But the moment he closed his eyes, he saw ink shifting on parchment. "No," he said, reopening them instantly. "No, thank you." He began praying with a vigor he had not displayed in years. His voice rose in gentle desperation. "Lord, I come before you as a humble servant." A candle sputtered too loudly. He jumped. "Humble but alert," he corrected. "Vigilant, rational, entirely unbothered." His words flowed faster, turning prayer into a defensive maneuver. He prayed so intensely that Brother Helvran, kneeling nearby, peeked over with a look that said, "Calm down. You're making the rest of us look spiritually lazy." Orelm ignored him. He pressed ahead, layering piety upon piety, hoping that if he stacked enough holiness between himself and the scroll, the universe would forget he had ever seen it. He prayed through the hymns. He prayed through the silence between hymns. He prayed through the awkward cough Brother Matin always released at the wrong moment. His voice shook with such exaggerated reverence that even he suspected God might be squinting suspiciously. "If I appear devout enough," Orelm reasoned internally, "the cosmos will leave me alone." This logic was comforting in the same way blankets are comforting during thunderstorms. They offer no real protection, but the illusion is soothing. After evening prayers ended, Orelm usually lingered in the chapel, letting the calm settle around him like fine dust. Not tonight. Tonight he bolted out the chapel doors before the choir master could begin lecturing novices about their pitch. In the hallway, Orelm paced. He walked with extra purpose. He folded his hands with extra serenity. He smiled with extra piety at passing monks. Brother Rendell squinted at him. "You seem unusually cheerful." "Yes," Orelm replied in a suspiciously rigid tone. "Faith is delightful." "Ah," Rendell said slowly, backing away. Orelm continued smiling after he left, even though holding that smile required spiritual gymnastics. But the smile was important. The smile said, "I am well." The smile said, "My faith is unwavering." The smile said, "I am absolutely not being haunted by questionable parchment." Unfortunately, Orelm's face had never been designed for prolonged cheerfulness. After several minutes, the smile collapsed into something resembling mild panic. He resumed pacing. If prayer hadn't erased the problem, perhaps work would. Ah, yes, work. The monastery's oldest solution to everything. Existential dread, copy manuscripts, spiritual confusion, scrub floors, apocalyptic visions, weave baskets. Orelm hurried to the scriptorium, determined to drown thought beneath ink. He sat at his desk and dipped his quill. He began copying a psalm. His handwriting trembled like a candle flame being interrogated. He forced himself to breathe evenly. The words grew steadier, until he reached a phrase he had copied hundreds of times without noticing, and the truth shall reveal itself in time. He froze. No, he whispered. That is unrelated, coincidental, an unfortunate choice of phrasing. He crossed out the line, not aloud, deeply inappropriate, and rewrote it. His quill snapped. He took this as a personal attack from heaven. Fine. Manuscript copying was clearly not the answer. He moved on to sweeping the floor of the scriptorium, despite having already swept the archives earlier. He swept aggressively. He swept poetically. He swept as if trying to remove the memory itself from the floor. Brother Luthen passed by the doorway and blinked. "Orelm, is everything all right?" "Yes," Orelm said, sweeping harder. "Faith is strong. Floors are dirty. Life continues." Luthen nodded slowly, the nod people reserve for madmen and prophets, and left. Orelm kept sweeping long after the floor became spotless, long after his arms ached, long after denial began fraying at its edges. When work failed, he tried rationalization. He sat on his narrow cot, hands folded, face stern. "I am logical," he told the empty room. "I am reasonable. That scroll was simply old. Old things behave strangely. It is known." He nodded to himself. "Perhaps it wasn't warm. Perhaps my hands were cold. That creates contrast. Illusion. Perfectly normal." He nodded again, more confidently, and the ink did not move. "Optical fatigue, eye strain, happens all the time." A pause. And the whisper, also normal, could have been, "Air. Yes, the air. Air makes sounds. I am not the first monk to hear things that aren't divine." He leaned back, relieved. But then, the tiniest thought slipped in. If it was nothing, why do I feel watched? Orelm sat bolt upright. No, absolutely not. He lay down. He sat up again. He lay down once more, aggressively. He folded his blanket around himself like armor. He recited a short prayer for calm, then a longer one, then an excessively long one. Eventually, he drifted into a half-sleep hovering between consciousness and denial, the mind's favorite neighborhood for unsettling clarity. And just as he began slipping into dreams, he heard it. A whisper, soft, familiar, close. "Do you see it?" His eyes shot open. The room was empty, the hallway silent. But something, an awareness, a presence, lingered at the edge of the perception like an unwelcome footnote. He pulled the blanket up to his chin. "No," he whispered into the darkness, trembling. "I do not. And I never will." But the universe, as usual, ignored his preferences. The seed of doubt did not shrink. It flourished. It cracked open. It began to grow roots. Denial. The brilliant, desperate, theatrical denial began to unravel. Orelm closed his eyes, hoping sleep would rescue him. But he sensed it now. Faint. Persistent. Unstoppable. Something in the archives was calling him back. Denial, as comforting as it may be, has the life expectancy of a candle in a cathedral draught. By morning, Orelm's had burned itself into a pathetic puddle. He woke, feeling not refreshed, not renewed, not reborn into a clean day of rationality, but haunted, light-headed, spiritually disorganized. He had dreamed of ink crawling across parchment like ants on pilgrimage. He had dreamed of shelves sighing. He had dreamed of someone, something breathing just behind his ear, repeating one line, "Do you see it?" Which was inconvenient because Orelm was determined not to see anything. He sat up in bed with the posture of a man who already suspected the day had chosen violence. His blanket clung to him like a frightened disciple. He peeled it off and planted his feet on the cold stone floor, immediately regretting being alive. He muttered morning prayers with the tone of someone reciting legal disclaimers. He dressed half backwards, then forwards again. And when he stepped into the hallway, the monastery greeted him with a silence so thick it felt curated. Brother Alicia passed him, gave him a cheerful nod, and then paused. "You look pale," Alicia observed. "I am fine," Orelm lied. "You look like you argued with a demon all night." "I did," Orelm blurted, then corrected himself. "Not." Alicia blinked. "Are you sure?" "Yes, because your robe is inside out." Orelm looked down. It was. He fixed it with monkly shame. And that was the first sign of the day. Stupid, small, completely explainable, and utterly unhelpful. It confirmed nothing. It denied nothing. It simply poked his anxiety with a stick. Breakfast did not improve things. Orelm sat at the long wooden table, staring into his bowl of porridge, which stared back with the emotional depth of a gray swamp. He lifted his spoon. He paused. Because floating on top of the porridge, formed by oats arranged too precisely to be coincidence, was a shape, a symbol, a letter? No, 2 letters. 2 perfectly formed curves, unmistakable, D and S. He frowned. What is this supposed to mean? Brother Luthen glanced over. "Ah, divine signs." "No," Orelm snapped. "Porridge. It means porridge." But Luthen's eyes gleamed with mystical over-interpretation. "The spirits speak in breakfast, you know." "No, they don't. They do when necessary. Well, they need to stop." Orelm stirred the porridge aggressively, destroying the message. But even as the oats dissolved into shapeless mush, a whisper slid through the back of his thoughts. "Do you see it?" He dropped the spoon. The porridge made a wet, accusatory sound. That was the second sign. Still small, still ambiguous, still useless. After breakfast came chores. Orelm approached the herb garden, determined to lose himself in plants too sensible to communicate metaphysical riddles. He watered thyme. He trimmed basil. He glared at mint, which always grew with aggressive self-esteem. Then he noticed one of the stones that bordered the garden bed. A stone he had walked past every day for years had a crack shaped like a question mark. He crouched, touched it, traced the shape. The crack had not been there yesterday, or last week, or ever, but there it was now, bold as a prophecy and just as inconvenient. "Coincidence," he muttered. A breeze rustled the herbs in a way that felt like disagreement. The third sign, still unhelpful, still maddening. The day progressed with the persistent determination of a monk reciting psalms out of tune. Everywhere Orelm went, signs trailed him like needy children. In the laundry room, a robe hanging from a line twisted itself into a spiral shape. In the chapel, a candle flickered so violently it almost spelled something in smoke. In the refectory, a loaf of bread tore down the middle in a way that resembled a crude map of the monastery. In the hallway, he passed Brother Rendal, who suddenly said, "I had a dream about you." Orelm nearly screamed. "What kind?" "You were holding a book made of light." "Why?" "I don't know. I woke up before plot development." Orelm exhaled through clenched teeth. "Thank you. That is extremely unhelpful." "You're welcome," Rendell said, misunderstanding utterly. And then came the worst sign of all. The fourth sign. The sign Orelm tried hardest to ignore. He was sweeping again because sweeping had become his coping mechanism. He moved the broom across the flagstones with the weary dignity of a man fighting spiritual entropy. Dust swirled in modest spirals. Then the dust shifted, gathered, moved, not dramatically, not supernaturally, not in swirling vortices of holy revelation. No. It gathered into a shape so mundane, so human, that Aurelm wanted to faint and file a complaint simultaneously. 2 words, faint, soft, formed by specks of dirt. Look here. Aurelm dropped the broom. Absolutely not, he whispered to the dust. I am not participating. He stepped backward. The dust scattered, erasing the message with suspicious obedience. Aurelm stared at the now empty floor. He felt mocked. He felt chosen. He felt targeted by a universe with too much free time. No, he repeated. I do not look here. I look elsewhere. I look nowhere. I look at nothing. He turned. He marched out of the room. He told himself signs meant nothing without context. He told himself context was impossible without certainty. He told himself certainty was impossible when one was being harassed by porridge and dust. He told himself many things, but signs are seeds, and seeds sprout. By midday, the monastery felt like an oracle in passive-aggressive mode. Doors creaked at him. Windows rattled ominously. The sky dimmed briefly as if blinking. Aurelm tripped over his own sandals twice. Once he might accept, but twice felt personal. Monks kept giving him strange looks, the kind you give someone who's about to receive divine revelation or a nervous breakdown. Aurelm suspected it would be the latter. He moved through the corridors like a man walking underwater, weighed down by signs that meant everything and nothing. The walls seemed to lean in. The air shimmered faintly around him. His heartbeat tapped out a hesitant rhythm, as though unsure whether it was allowed to continue. Even the statues seemed to be watching him. Late in the afternoon, he crossed the cloister walkway and felt a drop of water hit his forehead. He paused, looked up. Clear skies. He touched his forehead. Another drop. Warm, deliberate. Aurelm whispered, "If this is divine communication through a leaky roof, I swear I will lose my faith on principle." He stepped aside. A third drop fell exactly where he had been standing. He stared. That was the 5th sign. Unhelpful, ambiguous, perfectly designed to irritate. By evening, Aurelm's nerves felt stretched thin enough to snap. His thoughts tangled into knots. His prayers tangled into knots. His sense of reality tangled into whatever happens beyond knots. He needed calm. He needed silence. He needed to avoid the archives forever. But fate, the dramatic playwright it always is, had other plans. He was heading toward the dormitory when Brother Elisiar called out, "Aurelm, the abbot wants you." Aurelm froze. "Why?" Elisiar shrugged. "Something about the archives." "The archives?" Aurelm repeated, voice cracking like overbaked pottery. "Yes." "Are they on fire?" "No." "Are they flooded?" "No." "Are they humming?" Elisiar blinked. "Why would they hum?" "Never mind," Aurelm muttered. He followed Elisiar down the corridor, each footstep echoing with dread. The abbot stood near the archive entrance, a tall, solemn man with the expression of someone who had never once appreciated irony. "Aurelm," the abbot said, "did you move anything in the archives yesterday?" Aurelm swallowed. "Define move." The abbot narrowed his eyes. "Something has shifted. A scroll is missing." Aurelm's soul performed a somersault. "Missing?" he croaked. "Yes, we must find it. It contains delicate fragments." Aurelm's face twitched. "Delicate. Handle it carefully when you locate it." Aurelm nodded mechanically. "And, Aurelm," the abbot added, "be attentive today. The air feels strange." Aurelm wanted to scream, "Yes," because the monastery is clearly having a spiritual temper tantrum, but monks are trained to swallow both emotions and reason. So he managed only, "I see." But he didn't. He didn't see anything clearly. He saw signs everywhere, and yet not one of them told him what to do next, which is the worst kind of spiritual ambiguity. He stepped into the archives. The room exhaled, quietly, knowingly, mockingly. Oram shivered, because the sixth sign was waiting for him, the scroll, back on the shelf, exactly where it had been before, except it pulsed, once, softly, like a heartbeat. Oram whispered, "No." The scroll whispered back, without sound, without movement, with nothing but presence. "Do you see it?" Oram did, but he wished he didn't. The signs had spoken. They had told him nothing he could use, and everything he could fear. Oram had always believed that spiritual crises were reserved for mystics, prophets, theologians who read too many apocalyptic commentaries, and occasionally Brother Rendall when he misplaced his favorite quill. He never imagined himself joining their ranks. He was a simple man, a man of broom and ink, of quiet doubts and quieter certainties. But crisis, true crisis, creeps like a shadow that refuses to match your step. And now it followed him everywhere. The archives, once his sanctuary of dusty stillness, now felt swollen with meaning, like a room holding its breath. Every shelf seemed subtly tilted toward him. Every scroll seemed to peer down as though evaluating his spiritual worth, which was frankly rude. Oram approached the shelf where the scroll had reappeared, breathing through his nose like someone preparing to interact with a morally questionable relic. There it lay, rolled tight, innocent, pulseless, until pulse. Again. Oram flinched so dramatically he almost dislocated his humility. "No," he whispered. "Stop that. That is not appropriate behavior for sacred text." But the scroll did not respond. It simply existed, warmly, knowingly, as though aware that his denial had reached its expiration date. Oram did not touch it. He had learned. He had not learned, but fear had vetoed curiosity for the moment. He stepped away from the shelf, hands raised like a man calming a skittish creature. He backed into the table behind him. The table groaned, loudly, theatrically, as if participating in the whole ordeal. Oram sighed. Wonderful. Even furniture is becoming symbolic. He left the archives in a hurry. The hallway outside flickered with torchlight, harmless at first glance, until he noticed the whole torches seemed to flare when he passed, as if greeting him or warning him, or simply being dramatic for sport. Then, as he rounded the corner, he heard something unexpected. Low chanting. Not unusual in a monastery. But this chanting came from the wrong direction, echoing through a hallway where no monks were assigned at this hour. He paused, listened. The chant grew louder, then softer, then dissolved completely, as though someone had whispered, "Never mind," and given up. Oram rubbed his temples. "I am losing my mind," he declared, which the monastery acoustics repeated back in disapproving echoes. He made his way to the courtyard, hoping clean air would sweep divine nonsense out of his ears. Instead, the courtyard greeted him with a sky covered in a thin gray veil, clouds arranged in uneven patterns. Oram stared upward. The clouds stared back, specifically by forming a shape that looked suspiciously like an eye. "Stop that," Oram said to the sky. "You don't fool me." He blinked. The eye dissolved. He blinked again. It reformed. Oram marched back inside before his theology collapsed outright. The descent continued everywhere he went. His chores turned mutinous. Buckets spilled before he touched them. Candles puffed out when he approached. Hymns he had sung for years suddenly sounded to his ears like riddles written by a drunk prophet. During midday prayer, he knelt with the other monks, head bowed, trying to sink into silence. It didn't work, because silence today had opinions. It pressed against him in waves, thick as honey, pulling at the edges of his thoughts. He tried to concentrate. His mind supplied the scroll. He shoved it away. His mind supplied ink shifting like breath. He shoved it again. His mind supplied the whisper. "Do you see it?" Orelm jerked upright. Brother Matin, sitting beside him, hissed, "What are you doing?" "I dropped my soul," Orelm whispered. "Well, pick it up quietly." The chanting resumed. Orelm forced himself back into position. He tried to inhale peace, but inhaled dread instead. After prayers, the abbot summoned the monks for announcements. Orelm tried to look invisible, a skill he had practiced for decades. But the abbot's gaze swept the room with suspicious precision. "There is unrest in the air," the abbot declared, "an unease." Orelm swallowed. "We must be vigilant," the abbot continued. "Faith is not tested in miracles, but in confusion." Orelm swallowed louder. "And some of you," the abbot added, scanning the room, "seem particularly unsettled." Orelm nearly choked on his own throat. Brother Luthen raised a hand. "Is the monastery perhaps haunted?" The abbot glared. "No." Brother Malvar raised a hand. "Infested with spirits?" "No." Brother Alicia raised a hand. "Is God angry?" "Possibly," the abbot admitted. Orelm fainted. He didn't fall dramatically, just slid sideways like a deflated sack of faith. His fellow monks gasped softly, then carried him to the infirmary, where the healer pressed herbs to his forehead and muttered, "These are the signs of spiritual exhaustion." Orelm would have corrected him, "These are the signs of a haunted scroll, you fools." But he lacked the energy for coherent panic. When he finally woke, the healer offered him tea infused with chamomile, thyme, and the faint smell of resignation. "You are pushing yourself too hard," the healer murmured. "No," Orelm croaked. "Something else is pushing me." "Ah," the healer nodded. "You are tired." Orelm sighed. There was no point explaining metaphysical harassment to someone who believed mint cured existential dread. He sipped the tea. It tasted like a question. He looked into the cup. The herbs floated into the shape of an eye. He threw the cup across the room. The healer stared at him, horrified. "Brother Orelm." "It slipped," Orelm said. "It flew," the healer corrected. Orelm left hastily. Back in the hallways, reality continued degrading around him in slow, poetic decay. The floor seemed to slope gently toward the archives. The shadows lengthened behind him like loyal dogs. The air vibrated faintly, the way air vibrates when an important truth is waiting around a corner, wearing a dramatic cloak. Orelm knew what was happening. Even if he refused to admit it, he knew. When signs accumulate, when routine crumbles, when silence becomes suggestive, faith trembles, faith cracks, faith begins peeling apart like old parchment. He tried, to resist. He recited every prayer he knew. He invented a few new ones. He begged God for clarity. He begged God for distance. He begged God for absolutely anything except mystery. God naturally responded with silence, the most traditional answer in divine correspondence. By evening, Orelm felt hollowed out. He drifted through Vespers like a ghost haunting his own body. His chanting faltered. His breath shook. Even his shadow looked uncertain of its loyalty. After prayers, he avoided the other monks. He went straight to the cloister walkway where cold wind tangled his robe and filled his lungs with the metallic taste of oncoming revelation. He leaned against a pillar, staring into the courtyard. "Why me?" he whispered. The wind answered by swirling dust into a little spiral at his feet. "Oh, wonderful," Aurel muttered. Very profound. He buried his face in his hands. He knew, deep down, in the soft and frightened part of his spirit, that he had reached a precipice. He felt suspended between belief and disbelief, clarity and confusion, sanctuary and abyss. His faith, once foggy but stable, now felt like cracked glass. Something was coming. Something wanted him. Not physically, not harmfully, but insistently. And he knew, without knowing how, that he could not escape it forever. He returned to his cell that night feeling like a man stepping into a dream he had not agreed to have. He lay in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The moonlight painted shapes on the stone. One looked like a scroll. Another looked like an eye. Another looked like a question mark stretching. He muttered to himself, "This is not happening." But he no longer believed himself, because in the silence that followed he felt it, a pulse, soft, distant, calling, from the archives, from that shelf, from that scroll. The descent was complete. Crisis had arrived, not loud, not violent, but inevitable. And somewhere in the distance of Aurelm's trembling mind, the whisper returned, faint, patient, unbearably calm. "Do you see it?" Aurelm closed his eyes. He did, and that terrified him more than anything else. There is a particular stillness that precedes disaster, not the loud kind with flames and trumpets, but the quiet, personal kind that sneaks in like an overly polite intruder. Aurelm awoke into that stillness. It wasn't silence. Monks knew silence well. This was a silence with intention, the kind that watches you wake up, the kind that sits beside your bed like a patient scribe waiting to record the moment everything inside you caves in. He sat up slowly, as if sudden movement might cause the universe to snap. His body felt heavy, not from sleep, but from the weight of too many unasked questions pressing against his ribs. He could not pretend anymore, not after the whisper in the night, not after the signs piling like cosmic laundry at his feet. This morning, denial had finally decided it was done. It left politely, closing the metaphysical door behind it, leaving Aurelm alone with his thoughts, never a safe situation. He dressed with trembling hands. His robe felt unfamiliar, like wearing someone else's faith. He stepped into the hallway where monks passed with calm purpose, unaware that Aurelm was spiritually combusting. "Brother Aurelm," Brother Rendell said with forced cheer. "You look—" "Don't say it," Aurelm interrupted. Rendell blinked. "I wasn't going to say anything specific." "Good. Don't." He walked away before Rendell could bless him, or worse, ask what was wrong. The monastery seemed altered today. Not visually, nothing dramatic. The stones were still the same. The wind still muttered nonsense along the rafters. The candles still flickered like nervous confessions. But beneath all that, beneath the mundanity, Aurelm sensed a shift, an invisible trembling, as though the building itself had become a throat suppressing a prophecy. He avoided the archives. He avoided eye contact with statues. He avoided thinking. He failed at all three. During morning prayers he knelt mechanically, repeating lines his mouth remembered even when his mind faltered. The chant rose in waves, but Aurelm felt none of it. His thoughts spiraled relentlessly around the scroll, around the whisper, around the uninvited pulse embedded in that scrap of text that had decided to ruin his perfectly functional, beautifully lukewarm faith. He prayed harder. Not more sincerely, Aurelm's sincerity had limits, but harder, like someone trying to hammer belief into place before it collapsed entirely. "Lord," he whispered under the chanting of the others, "if you are attempting to send me a message, please stop, or phrase it more clearly, or send it to someone qualified." A candle near him sputtered violently. Orelm glared at it. Not helpful. The flame shot up half an inch. Stop that. It settled, as if offended. After prayers, he attempted chores again. He scrubbed floors that were already clean. He rearranged scrolls that did not need rearranging. He watered herbs that, not unlike Orelm, were already overhydrated. But avoidance, while noble in its own unsteady way, cannot stop what has been written into the fabric of your unraveling. By midday, Orelm felt the pull. Not emotional, not intellectual, something deeper. A gravitational shift in the unseen, a tug on his bones. The archives were calling. He resisted, dramatically, heroically, comically, but his resistance held all the strength of wet parchment. His steps carried him despite himself. The corridors seemed longer, stretching like the inside of a dream where walls never quite end. Shadows elongated. Doors whispered as he passed, their hinges offering tiny prophecies. When he reached the entrance of the archives, he stopped. The door was half open. It had not been left open. Orelm knew that door. He had closed it meticulously every day for 14 years, because Brother Elisiar believed drafts caused spiritual distraction. Now it stood ajar, a sliver of dimness beckoning like a sly invitation. No, Orelm whispered to the door. Absolutely not. But the door, the traitor, drifted open another inch, as if breathing. He stepped inside. The room was dimmer than usual. A soft amber haze floated through the air, rising and falling like quiet breaths. Dust moved with deliberate grace, swirling in lazy spirals that formed shapes too purposeful to be accidents. Shapes like letters, words, almost sentences, then dissolving again. A hallucination, Orelm muttered. Obviously, probably hunger or dehydration or demonic interference disguised as low blood sugar. He approached the shelf. The scroll pulsed, once, then twice, like it recognized him. Orelm squeezed his eyes shut. No, I refuse. I'm not chosen for anything. I'm barely chosen to sweep this room. He turned to leave. He did not leave. Something behind him, some shift in the air, stilled him. He turned back. The scroll unrolled itself. Just a few centimeters, enough to reveal ink. Ink that glowed. Orelm staggered backward. Stop that. Stop doing things. Texts do not unroll themselves. The scroll, ignoring his request, unrolled another inch. The ink shimmered like molten gold mixed with dusk. Words formed. They rearranged. They breathed. Yes, Orelm saw it clearly. They breathed. He pressed a shaking hand to his chest. This is not real. This is not real. This is not... The whisper came before he finished. Not in the room. Not in the air. Inside him. Threads of sound weaving into thought. Do you see it? He broke. Not loudly. He didn't scream or faint or convulse like prophets in old stories. His breaking was quiet. A soft internal collapse, like a candle folding into itself. Orelm sank to his knees, robe pooling around him like wilted belief. He stared at the glowing text, its letters shifting with an elegance that mocked his trembling. "What do you want from me?" he whispered. The ink shimmered. The air hummed. The dust spirals aligned, briefly forming a pattern. A symbol Orelm did not recognize, yet felt deep inside the marrow of his unsteady faith. He reached out. He didn't mean to. His hand moved of its own accord, guided by something ancient, patient, amused. His fingers brushed the scroll. Warmth flooded through him, not comforting warmth, but overwhelming, trembling, truth-shaped warmth that tasted like revelation and felt like drowning. Visions erupted behind his eyes, not images, no divine slideshow, concepts, weight, meaning. A terrible, beautiful clarity. He saw faith, not as belief, not as devotion, but as something vast, living, breathing, indifferent to the categories humans forced upon it. He saw time folding like cloth. He saw 1,000 prayers drifting unanswered because no one had been listening. He saw divine silence was not neglect, but the natural quiet of something too large to speak in syllables. He saw himself, a small figure sweeping dust in an infinite library, utterly insignificant and yet seen. He gasped. His hand jerked back. The scroll snapped shut. The room fell still, utterly still. Orem collapsed onto his hands, gasping for air that now felt too thin. "No," he whispered, tears pricking his eyes. "No, I cannot handle this." He felt emptied, unmade, unraveled in ways he could not articulate. This was no spiritual awakening. Awakenings are tender. Awakenings have guidance, or angels, or at minimum encouraging metaphors. This was a rupture, a tearing open, a violent introduction to a truth he had never asked for. He rocked forward, forehead pressing against the cold floor. "Please," he whispered, "take it back. Whatever this is, take it back." There was no answer, only the soft sound of dust settling. He stayed on the floor a long time, long enough for his shaking to calm, long enough for the realization to harden. His faith had shattered. Not because he no longer believed, but because belief suddenly meant something entirely different. Something vast, something unbearable, something he was not prepared to comprehend. When he finally stood, his legs trembled. He left the archives. He did not close the door. He could not bring himself to touch it. The hallway outside greeted him with ordinary silence, unaware that one man's entire theology had collapsed like an unstable roof beam. Orem drifted back to his cell, every footstep echoing with the heaviness of revelation. He sat on his bed. He did not pray. He could not. His voice would have broken under the weight of it. Instead, he whispered one sentence, barely audible, meant for no one and heard by everything. "I see it." And that was the breaking point. The moment the world changed. Not visibly, not dramatically, but permanently. Because once you see, you cannot unsee. There's a particular kind of quiet that arrives only after something inside you has come apart. Not peace, not rest, certainly not clarity. It is the silence of aftermath, the silence that settles over a battlefield once both armies realize they've forgotten what they were fighting for. Orem awoke into that silence. He did not remember falling asleep, only collapsing sideways on his bed like a man whose spirit had tripped and dragged his body down with it. Now the dawn crept through the cracks in the shutters, a thin, gray sorrow of a light, the kind that makes everything look slightly haunted. The air felt heavy, like the monastery itself had been eavesdropping on his crisis, and now didn't know how to face him. He sat up slowly. Every movement felt like lifting something holy and broken. The world looked wrong, not visually. Everything appeared the same. Stone walls, straw mattress, a wooden stool that was perpetually crooked, but the atmosphere had changed. It felt like breathing inside a question, like waking in a room that expected him to apologize for something he did not understand. He rubbed his face with both hands. They shook. His mind was too full of absence. The visions from yesterday had evaporated, leaving only outlines, like faint fingerprints left on the surface of consciousness. He remembered warmth, the feeling of being perceived by something older than language, the realization that faith was neither small nor safe. And then, nothing. A void that echoed. He whispered, "Lord?" But even his own voice sounded hesitant, as if afraid to wake whatever truth had looked at him. No answer came, not even the comforting silence he used to trust. This was a different silence, a silence that observed. Orelm stood and opened the shutters. Morning light spilled in, pale, dusty, unsure of itself. The courtyard lay below him unmoving. Even the trees seemed reluctant to rustle their leaves. "It's too quiet," he muttered. But the monastery offered no rebuttal. He dressed with mechanical motions, his body following routines his faith no longer inhabited. He stepped into the hallway. The air felt thick, as though it held the residue of yesterday's crisis. Monks passed him, quiet, slow, reverent in a way that made Orelm uneasy. Had they felt something too? Had the monastery shuddered without his noticing? Brother Rendal nodded to him. "Sleep well?" Orelm opened his mouth. The correct answer, yes, of course, did not arrive. Instead, he said, "I don't know." Rendal blinked. "How do you not know?" "It is complicated." "Are you ill?" "No." "Are you blessed?" Orelm flinched. "No." Rendal frowned. "I said it's complicated," Orelm snapped, then regretted being rude. Rendal walked away looking confused and slightly frightened, which was probably the correct reaction to Orelm at this point. He made his way to morning prayers. The chapel felt colder than usual, colder than stone ought to feel. He knelt among the others, but he felt strangely separate from them, like a thought misplaced in the wrong manuscript. The chanting began. Low, steady, familiar. Orelm tried to join, but his voice faltered immediately. The words felt foreign in his mouth, as though belonging to someone who no longer lived inside him. He closed his lips and simply listened. The prayer echoed through the vaulted chamber. He had prayed that same chant thousands of times, but now each syllable felt empty, not meaningless, but emptied of assumptions. Hollow the way a cave is hollow, resonant, echoing, dangerous. He stared at the altar. The candles flickered the way candles always flickered. But today, every flicker seemed exaggerated, symbolic. He found himself wondering, are they trembling? Or am I? He bowled his head lower. His thoughts drifted like fog over a ruined landscape. What now? What do I do with truth too large to hold? What do I do with faith now that it's no longer a comfortable shape? What do I do with silence that watches instead of soothes? The chant ended. He didn't notice until Brother Elisiar nudged him. "Orelm, prayer is over." Orelm looked up. The entire room had risen. He was still kneeling, alone. He stood quickly, bumping into the pew, apologizing to it, because that was easier than apologizing to the monks. After prayers, chores resumed as usual, but Orelm found no solace in them. The garden felt wrong. The herbs smelled too sharp, too alive. The soil seemed to pulse faintly beneath his hands. The wind brushed his cheek like an almost question. He dropped the trowel. In the kitchen, he attempted to chop vegetables but kept freezing mid-motion, distracted by the rhythmic creak of the wooden beams, each creak sounding eerily like a sigh. Brother Luthen asked, "Orelm, why are you staring at that carrot?" "I am not staring," Orelm said. "You've been staring for 5 minutes. Time is an illusion." Luthen slowly backed away. The hours passed in a blur of silent tension. Orelm barely spoke. When he did, it was in sentences that tripped over themselves. He felt detached from his body, as though his thoughts walked beside him instead of inside him. He found himself listening to everything. The scrape of sandals, the flow of water, the murmur of wind beneath doors, the heartbeat of the monastery. He had never heard the monastery breathe before. He didn't like it. But the worst moment came unexpectedly. He entered the cloister walkway for fresh air. The arches cast striped shadows across the stone. Light filtered through in soft beams. He walked slowly, dragging his fingertips along the wall for grounding. Then he felt the wall pulse beneath his hand, a soft, living tremor. He snatched his hand away as though burned. "No," he whispered, "not again." He pressed his palm back against the stone. Nothing. Cold, still, lifeless, as stone should be. But he had felt it. He knew he had felt it. He turned away from the wall and sank onto a bench. His body curled inward. His breath trembled. The crisis was no longer coming. It was here, coiled around his ribs, patient, tightening. He buried his face in his hands. He did not cry. He wanted to, but something inside him felt too hollow to produce tears. The silence deepened around him, not the comfortable silence of routine, but the raw silence of absence, the silence left behind when certainty dissolves. He whispered into that silence, "What do you want from me?" His voice broke like thin glass. No answer came, only wind. Always wind, carrying nothing but dust. As the day wore on, the monastery grew dim, sinking into the blue hush of approaching night. Aurum remained withdrawn, moving through the halls like a ghost wearing a monk's robe. The other brothers gave him space. They didn't understand, but they sensed something fragile, something trembling behind his eyes. It wasn't until he lay in his cot that the full weight of it settled. The visions had vanished. The signs had quieted. The scroll remained untouched. Everything was still, suspiciously still, as though the universe were watching him recover from shock before delivering the next blow. He lay on his back, staring into the darkness. His thoughts whispered, soft, disjointed. What happens next? Is this what prophets feel before they break? Is this what doubt becomes when it grows teeth? Is this still faith, or something else? The silence whispered back, not words, not meaning, but a pressure, a presence, the sense of something unseen sitting at the foot of his bed, patient as time. He turned his head. Empty air, shadow, stone, dust, but he felt watched, not maliciously, not kindly, just factually, as though he had become a line in a story someone else was reading. He closed his eyes. Sleep did not come, only stillness, an immense waiting stillness, the silence after the storm, the silence before the truth speaks again. Night in a monastery is a strange creature. It does not simply fall, it seeps. It climbs the walls like ivy. It curls beneath doors. It settles into robes and thoughts and unresolved prayers. By the time the stars hung above the mountain like weary lanterns, Aurum lay awake, suspended in that heavy darkness that feels less like the absence of light and more like the presence of something waiting. His room felt different again, not colder, not warmer, but attentive, as though the shadows had gathered in the corners to watch him without blinking, as though the silence had taken a seat beside him, crossed its legs and said, "Well, what now?" Aurum turned over, pulled his blanket up to his chin, and whispered, "I refuse to participate in anything tonight." The universe, historically unimpressed with his refusals, continued its work anyway. It began with a faint tapping, soft, rhythmic, polite. Not on the door, not on the window, not on the wall. Inside his head, tap, tap, tap. Aurum sat up sharply. "No, absolutely not. I am not entertaining metaphysical knocking." The tapping stopped. Aurum exhaled. Good. Then came a second sound, a soft rustle, like parchment turning itself. Aurum froze. He looked toward the shelf where he kept his personal scrolls. They were all rolled, tied, obedient. Another rustle, different, non-geographical, as though the sound came from neither here nor there, but from the idea of parchment itself. Aurum pressed his palms to his eyes. I am imagining things. This is what happens when you see impossible texts, hallucinations, spiritual tinnitus, entirely expected. The rustling paused, then resumed with more insistence. Aurum threw his blanket aside, stood, and began pacing around the room with the controlled panic of a monk, trying not to wake his neighbors with an existential crisis. "Enough," he hissed at the air, "enough of the riddles, the signs, the breathing stone, the glowing ink." And then it happened. A light, soft, warm, golden, it seeped beneath his door like spilled sunrise. Aurum's breath caught. The hallway was dark. All candles were extinguished after night prayers. No one should be awake. No one should be carrying light. He approached slowly. The light pulsed once, as though sensing his steps. Aurum whispered, "Do not open that door." He opened the door. The hallway was empty, utterly empty. But the air glowed. A gentle radiance hovered there, neither bright nor dim, neither illuminating nor obscuring. It was light with no source. Light undecided about its purpose, light that felt familiar. Aurum stepped into the hall. Immediately the light drifted backward, as though retreating, but not fleeing. More like it wanted him to follow. "Oh, no," Aurum muttered. "I know this trope. Mystical light, beckoning monk, cryptic revelation at the end. Absolutely not." But he followed anyway. Because when one's faith has shattered and the world insists on handing out metaphysical breadcrumbs, one rarely has the emotional stamina to refuse. The light drifted down the hallway, softening the shadows, turning the stones golden. Aurum trailed after it like an unwilling prophet. It led him, of course, to the archives. The door stood open. The light slipped inside. Aurum hesitated at the threshold. The archives felt different tonight, warmer, alive, as though the shelves had inhaled and were holding the breath, waiting for something remarkable or disastrous to occur. "Aurum," he whispered to himself, "you do not have to go in there." He went in there. The light moved toward the shelf. That shelf. The scroll lay exactly where he had left it after his collapse. Closed now, still now, no longer pulsing. But as the light drifted above it, the parchment seemed to stir, ever so slightly. Aurum approached with the reluctant reverence of a man attending his own trial. The light dimmed. And then, quietly, gently, the scroll unrolled by a single inch. Ink shimmered in the glow. Not gold this time, not moving, not breathing, just still, quiet, waiting ink. Aurum leaned closer. The words were faint, old, worn, but readable, and utterly incomprehensible. They were not instructions, not warnings, not prophecies, not psalms, not even coherent sentences, fragments, phrases, breaths of meaning scattered like birds startled into flight. He read aloud, voice trembling. "The truth is, hidden by its own light, those who seek shall unseek. Faith bends where certainty breaks. The eye sees only itself. The message is not the message." Aurum blinked. What does that mean? Nothing answered. He read more. The divine speaks in hunger sometimes, or in the ache behind the heart. You look for revelation but find only yourself looking. Those who carry questions become questions. He frowned. That is unhelpful and vaguely insulting. He continued. There is no outside, only layers. Names collapse, meaning breathes, dust remembers. Once you see, you must unsee to see again. Aurum stepped back. His mind scrambled to understand. Was this wisdom, nonsense, mystical poetry, the ramblings of a monk who had forgotten where his sentences began, or something deeper, something that could not fit into linear thought? He stared at the ink. It did not move. It did not glow. It did not whisper. It simply existed. And yet, Aurum felt something shift inside him, not like the breaking of faith earlier, not like visions overwhelming his senses, but something small, a soft click, a gentle alignment. Like two thoughts he had never connected suddenly recognized each other. He whispered, "Is this revelation?" The light beside him dimmed, then brightened. Aurum took this as encouragement. But what does it mean? The light dimmed again. Aurum sighed. Of course, enlightenment through ambiguity. How very traditional. He looked at the scroll again. The words blurred. Not literally. His eyes were simply tired. But metaphorically, they blurred too. Meaning drifted in and out of reach, like a prayer half-formed, like memory dissolving into mist. He closed the scroll gently. The light retreated a little. He followed it toward the center of the room. "What am I supposed to understand?" he asked quietly. The light flickered once, twice. Then, unexpectedly, it went out. The room plunged into darkness. Aurum gasped. Then something happened. Something so subtle, so quiet, so bewilderingly gentle that Aurum nearly missed it. He felt peaceful, not comforted, not healed, but strangely, impossibly calm. The darkness was soft, inviting, hospitable even. It was the opposite of revelation, and yet part of it. He stood there for a long moment in the dark, breathing slowly. Then he whispered, "Is the revelation that there is no revelation?" A faint sound answered him. Not a whisper, not a voice. A rustle, like clothing. Aurum turned. The door to the archives was still open, and in the hallway, standing in the dim spill of distant moonlight, was a shape. Tall, still human, or close enough. Aurum's heart lurched. "Who?" he began. But the shape dissolved. Not vanished, not fled. Simply dissolved, like an idea withdrawing before fully forming. Aurum stared, unable to move. Had it been someone? Had it been something? Had it been a trick of his collapsing sense of reality? Had hunger finally claimed his sanity? He swallowed. Am I supposed to understand this? The darkness gave no reply, but the silence felt softer now, as though it had exhaled. Aurum left the archives slowly, closing the door behind him with tender fear. The hallway felt longer tonight, quieter, as though the monastery had been holding its breath and now, finally, was letting it go. He stepped into his room, sat on his bed, and realized something profound. He had no idea whether what he experienced was divine or psychological, or simply the spiritual equivalent of dizziness. And, to his surprise, he wasn't afraid. He whispered into the darkness, "I do not understand." And the darkness whispered back, not in words, not in sound, but in feeling, "You are not meant to." Not yet. Aurum smiled faintly, an ambiguous revelation. Barely a revelation at all. But it was something. A single thread in a tapestry he had not yet learned to see. He lay back onto his cot, stared at the ceiling, and let the uncertainty settle. It felt almost comforting. Morning came as though unsure whether it should. The light didn't spill with confidence the way it usually did. Instead, it seeped through the shutters reluctantly, like a shy novice afraid of interrupting whatever cosmic strangeness had unfolded overnight. Aurum woke slowly, not with a start, not with dread, simply with the soft awareness that something inside him had shifted yet again. He sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. For the first time since the scroll had revealed itself, he didn't feel the tightness in his chest. He felt hollow, but in a gentle way, like a cup waiting to be filled, an emptiness that wasn't absence, but possibility. He rose, dressed with steadier hands, and stepped into the hallway. The monastery looked the same, which was suspicious. The stone walls still held their ancient chill. The torches still flickered as though gossiping with the shadows. The faint scent of last night's incense still clung to the air like a stubborn ghost. And yet, something in the atmosphere had quietly rearranged itself. Not visibly, just perceptibly enough for a man like our realm, who had recently developed a keen sensitivity to metaphysical nonsense, to notice. He walked toward the chapel for morning prayers, and with each step he felt the world observing him, not in accusation, but in curiosity, as though the universe wondered what he would do next, as though God was leaning slightly closer, not to answer, but to listen. Brother Rendell greeted him with a cheerful wave. "Aurelm, you look better today." "Do I?" Aurelm asked. "Yes, less pale, less haunted, more moderately alive." Aurelm nodded. "Thank you. I have been working on appearing functional. That's the spirit." Aurelm smiled faintly, a small, tired smile, but a real one. During morning prayer, Aurelm sat quietly. He did not chant. He did not mouth the words automatically. Instead, he simply listened, really listened, to the murmurs of the monks around him, to the creak of the chapel beams, to the soft, hesitant breath of the candle flames. The world felt different today, or perhaps he was different. Faith bends where certainty breaks. He didn't know whether the line came from memory, from revelation, or from his own mind trying to imitate mystical poetry. But it echoed in him. When prayers concluded, Brother Elisiar approached. "Aurelm, you seem calmer." "I am," Aurelm admitted. "What happened?" Aurelm hesitated. How did one summarize metaphysical deconstruction followed by ambiguous illumination and a hallway full of dissolving silhouettes? He settled on, "I had a thought." Elisiar nodded solemnly, as though this were a heavy theological confession. "Be careful with those." "I'm trying." The day's chores passed quietly. Aurelm swept corridors without fear of dust forming messages. He tended the garden without herbs arranging themselves into symbols. He copied a psalm without ink shimmering in cosmic defiance. Everything behaved normally, which was suspicious in itself, but Aurelm chose to accept it. His crisis had not been solved. His questions had not been answered. His faith had not been restored or destroyed, but something had softened, something had settled, something had opened. It was late afternoon when the abbot found him on the cloister walkway, gazing at the courtyard with the thoughtful stare of a monk who had recently survived an encounter with a possibly divine manuscript. "Aurelm," the abbot said, "may I speak with you?" Aurelm nodded. They walked in silence toward the benches beneath the arches. Wind stirred the ivy overhead. Dust curled lazily along the stones. The abbot folded his hands. "Several brothers have mentioned you seem troubled lately." Aurelm laughed softly. "Lately?" The abbot smiled. "Rare thing, like a comet or an obedient novice. Very well, troubled for a while." Aurelm nodded. "That is fair. Is it something you wish to confess?" Aurelm considered the question carefully. Should he speak of the scroll, the pulse, the ink that breathed, the visions that unmade him, the dissolving shape in the hallway, the ambiguous revelation that gave him peace without clarity? He opened his mouth, then closed it. He realized he did not have language for what he had experienced. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. It was not sin. It was not doubt. It was not revelation in any traditional sense. It was something in between, a threshold rather than a conclusion. He shook his head gently. "I have nothing to confess." The abbot studied him. "Are you certain?" "No," Orelm said honestly, "but that is the truth." The abbot exhaled slowly. "Very well. If you need counsel, my door is open." Orelm bowed. "Thank you." The abbot left. Orelm remained seated, watching the lengthening shadows slide across the stones like slow-moving water. He felt strangely at home in this uncertainty. Strange, yes, but not frightened. The world no longer looked steady, but it looked honest, and that was enough. He did not return to the archives that evening. He had no desire to touch the scroll, no curiosity pressing at the edges of his mind. Whatever message it had held, if it had been a message at all, felt complete in its incompleteness. The mystery remained. The questions remained. But Orelm felt no urgency to solve them. As twilight deepened, monks lit lanterns along the walkways. Orelm stopped to watch one flame crackle softly to life. It wavered in the wind, uncertain, then steadied itself. He whispered, "Do you see it?" And for the first time, the question felt like his own. Not a whisper haunting him. Not a demand chasing him, but an invitation. He did not know whether he would ever see the truth clearly. He did not know whether the scroll would reveal more, or whether it had been meant for him at all, or whether it had been meant for anyone. Maybe it was divine. Maybe it was madness. Maybe it was simply old ink playing tricks in dim light. Maybe God was sending messages with obscure metaphors again, or maybe God was avoiding messages entirely, like someone dodging correspondence on a Monday morning. Orelm chuckled quietly, then sighed, then smiled. He stood at the edge of the cloister, looking out at the encroaching night, deep, dark, full of possibility. Nothing was resolved, nothing was explained, nothing was concluded. But something in him had changed. Faith had not returned to what it was. It had not broken entirely. It had become something else, something softer, something wider, something curious. Orelm whispered into the gathering dark, "I don't know what happens next." The silence answered with gentle indifference. And somehow, that was enough. Night settled over the monastery with the softness of a closing eyelid. The moon drifted across the sky like a pale pilgrim, avoiding the attention of the stars. The air held that hush found only in ancient places, buildings that have outlived their architects, prayers that have outlasted their believers, and secrets that have outgrown their keepers. Orelm sat alone in the archives. He hadn't planned to return, not tonight, not after everything, but his feet had carried him with the quiet insistence of unfinished thought. There was no fear this time, no trembling, no sense of impending revelation or cosmic ambush, just a calm curiosity, like visiting an old wound to see if it still hurt. The shelves loomed gently above him. Dust floated lazily, unhurried for once. The shadows were soft-edged, as though exhausted from being symbolic all week. And on the shelf before him, the scroll, still, quiet, closed. The room smelled faintly of parchment and night, two scents that belonged together like questions and silence. Orelm sat on the floor before the scroll, back against a cool stone pillar. He breathed deeply, letting the stillness settle into his bones. He did not touch it. He didn't need to. A revelation, he had learned, is not something you hold. It's something that holds you, gently or violently, sometimes both. He leaned his head back, eyes half closed. How strange, he whispered, that one piece of parchment could bring so much confusion. The scroll, mercifully, did not pulse, nor unroll, nor burst into flames, nor whisper questions into his fragile psyche. It simply existed. Orelm exhaled in relief. Good. We are done with theatrics. But the truth was, he didn't know whether it was done. Mystical events had a habit of resurfacing, like doubts in the middle of prayer, or crumbs in the folds of a monk's robe. Whatever the scroll was, divine, cursed, misunderstood, merely dusty, it had already accomplished something irreversible. It had unsettled him. It had cracked him open. It had rearranged the furniture of his faith, and now he wandered through the new layout barefoot, occasionally bumping into sharp edges. But he was not lost. Not anymore, just in process. He smiled faintly, an expression rare for him, but it fit tonight. Outside, the wind traveled lazily through the cloister arches, carrying the scent of cool stone and distant mountain frost. The monastery creaked in its sleep. Somewhere a candle sputtered out, retiring early from its shift. Orelm felt no grand purpose, no burning clarity, no divine mandate. The scroll had given him many things, questions, fear, dizziness, but not answers. And, strangely, he appreciated that. He had always assumed the divine revealed itself in bright certainty, in thunderous clarity, in messages written with the confidence of eternal truth. But now, after everything, he suspected differently. Perhaps revelation was not an answer, but an opening. Not a declaration, but a doorway. Not a truth, but a trembling. He rested his fingertips lightly on the floor beside him. Cool, solid stone. Maybe, he whispered to the darkness, faith isn't about knowing. Maybe it's about staying. The darkness did not object. Orelm let his eyes drift closed, and in the velvet hush of that quiet room, he felt it again, not fear, not awe, not the mind-rending shock of visions, but a soft presence, like someone exhaling beside him, like a page turning in a book he hadn't realized he was reading. His eyes opened gently, but nothing moved, nothing shone, nothing spoke, just the scroll, just the dust, just the silence. Orelm smiled, because the silence this time did not feel empty. It felt patient. He stood slowly, stretching the stiffness from his limbs. He looked around the archive, the room that had both shaken and steadied him. Then, in an act both humble and strangely ceremonial, he bowed his head toward the scroll. Not in worship, not in fear, in acknowledgement. Then he left the room quietly. Down the corridor he walked, steps soft in the dim glow of the moonlight. His shadow followed him, no longer anxiously, no longer stretched or distorted. Just a companion, easy and faithful. He reached the courtyard. The stone was cool beneath his feet. The night sky unfolded above him like a vast, unreadable manuscript. Stars glimmered faintly, distant and ancient and careless. Orelm tilted his head back. He felt small. He felt uncertain. He felt strangely at peace. Perhaps, he murmured to the sky, truth comes to us only when we stop insisting on understanding it. The sky, in its timeless arrogance, offered no commentary. He laughed quietly to himself. Then he turned, ready to return to his cell, to sleep at last without fear. But as he walked through the cloister walkway, he felt something catch his attention. Not a sound, not a movement. A sensation, like the universe tapping him gently on the shoulder. He paused, turned his gaze back toward the hallway, half expecting the dissolving silhouette to return, half hoping it wouldn't. Nothing stood there, just stone, dust, moonlight. Orelm nodded. Good. Let us end the evening unambiguously ambiguous. He continued walking. And somewhere, maybe in his mind, maybe in the stonework, maybe in the air, a familiar whisper rose softly. "Do you see it?" Aurelm did not turn. He simply answered, with the quiet confidence of someone no longer afraid of uncertainty. "Not yet, but I think I'm learning how." He reached his door, opened it, stepped into the small darkness of his room. And for the first time in many nights, the darkness felt like rest. A single candle waited on his table. He lit it, slowly, gently. The flame flickered into being, casting warm gold across the walls. It wavered once, then steadied. Aurelm watched it burn, mesmerized by its simplicity. A candle, a shadow, a room, a man. No revelations, no visions, no cosmic upheavals, just breath, just warmth, just being. And that was enough. He blew out the candle. Darkness embraced him softly. The night swallowed the small sound of his sigh, and the monastery, ancient and knowing, settled into its timeless quiet. Aurelm lay down. Sleep found him at last. Somewhere, deep in the archives, a scroll glowed faintly, briefly, then faded into stillness. Not gone, not dormant, just waiting, as all truths do. And the night held its breath, not in fear, not in anticipation, but in reverence for the simple mystery of a question left open. If this story kept your mind wandering, your heart stirred, or your eyelids hovering just a little longer tonight, subscribe to Religious Night Stories, where faith never sleeps, even if you do.